Obviously, as you've seen and have heard, our work is more important than ever. And one of the most important assets that we have and should know about is the legal aspect of what's happening on campuses. What are the legal perspectives on campus anti-Semitism? What can we do on a legal level to help us? And I'd like to invite ACF Advisory Board member Laurie Josephs, and co-founder, I should say, to join me on the stage, if you will, along with our other speakers, Aliza Lewin, Yael Lerman, and Ben Ryberg, to join us all. And we can then get started, and I'll pass it off to Laurie.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. We are thrilled to have so many participants who, notwithstanding the upheavals and distractions of our COVID-challenged world, remain concerned and committed about our fight against anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism on the college campus. As Avi mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders of ACF and a member of its advisory board. I am also a retired attorney, having practiced corporate litigation for many years. As an attorney, I understand the power of litigation to effect meaningful changes, especially when one is pushing back against those with the ability, resources, and incentives to silence you, as so often happens to pro-Israel students on the college campus. I am honored to introduce our three panelists who will give us their legal perspectives on campus anti-Semitism. They are Yael Lerman, Director of the Stand With Us Sadoff Legal Department, Aliza Lewin, President of the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law, and Benjamin Ryberg, Chief Operating Officer and Director of Research for the Lawfare Project. So I have a few questions and I'm going to throw them out, and our panelists, one of them will choose to answer first. So the first question is, what are the legal challenges that organizations and students face when combating anti-Semitism on campus?
I'll take this first one. Laurie, thank you so much for having me here today. Thank you to ACF, it's an honor. I think the biggest legal challenge we're facing is that a lot of anti-Semitism on campus is not legally actionable at first glance. It's toxic, it's outrageous, and appears to be perfectly legal bigotry to administrations. So much of our work as a legal department at Stand With Us is a matter of finding the violated laws and reminding administrations that they have a voice to use and hold them accountable. A simultaneous challenge I think that we have right now is that we live in an era of hypersensitivity around certain types of bigotry, but anti-Semitism in this moment is often treated with a totally different standard. Jews are generally not seen as part of a minority in need of protection. And another challenge is that at this particular moment, we aren't in an era where people or administrations necessarily care about individual rights. It is about group identity. So when Jews and Zionists are discriminated against on campus, that is an attack precisely on their individual right to be Jews or Israelis or Zionists, but people don't necessarily care. An example of these challenges surfaced this year at UC Merced. A professor posted a series of anti-Semitic images on his Twitter account, including an image of a Zionist brain filled with anti-Semitic stereotypes. The university initially dismissed calls to discipline this professor, saying it was academic freedom and he was using his private Twitter account. So in response, Stand With Us sent a legal letter to the UC Merced administration and led a community firestorm directed at the university for justice. Thanks in part to this, the administration opened a full investigation, instituted mandatory trainings on hate, and also new policies regarding anti-Semitism. We were contacted by concerned members and alumni and students who were instrumental in helping behind the scenes. And this is perfectly indicative of where we're at right now in terms of legal issues and anti-Semitism on campus. When anti-Semitism occurs, administrations hesitate. Their aggressive posturing and immediate repercussions come when it's bigotry, but not necessarily when it's anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And administrations have to be shamed or reminded by alumni, by organizations, by lawyers, that they will be held accountable.
Do any of the other panelists have additional thoughts?
Sure. I agree with everything that that Yael said. And I also think that one of the real challenges that we have is trying to get administrators to even recognize what is happening as unlawful harassment and discrimination. One of the biggest challenges is that many administrators mistakenly believe that what they're witnessing on campus is just a political disagreement. They don't realize that what is actually happening on campus is part of a strategic campaign to marginalize and ostracize Jewish students. They're being pushed out. They're actually being pushed out of positions on student government. They're being pushed out of clubs. They're being pushed out. They're being told, particularly if they are Zionists, if they believe in and support the right of a Jewish homeland to exist, of Israel to exist as the homeland for the Jewish people, if they believe that, then they're being told you're not welcome on campus. And the university administrators don't understand that that is what is happening, that Jews are being labeled as beyond the pale. They're being told they should be excluded because they're racist, they're white supremacists, they're oppressors. So we shouldn't be including them. They are part of the group that we need to combat if we stand for justice. That's the education that we need to educate both the administrators, but we also need to educate the students and the alumni and the trustees, all to be able to articulate what's happening as harassment and discrimination. Because it's only if you can articulate it as harassment and discrimination that you can then apply the laws that require the university to protect the students from harassment and discrimination. Right? In this country, the First Amendment protects your right to express yourself as a bigot, and it doesn't protect you from an opinion you may find offensive. So as long as university administrators think this is just a speech issue, they feel that they don't have to do anything. It's only when they realize that Jews are actually being targeted, marginalized, demonized, and excluded that they realize that they actually have to take some kind of action.
And to show that is one of the things that you would advocate is the double standard, that other groups are not treated this way. Right?
That's for sure. I mean, as Yael said, other forms of bigotry are addressed. And part of that, I think, is because our society has sensitized people to anti-Black racism, to Islamophobia, right? To anti-Muslim hatred or anti-hatred of LGBT community, right? These are all the types of things that the university will very quickly jump to address. But when it comes to anti-Semitism, they don't see it. They don't view it as important. They don't care, and they don't actually recognize it sometimes as the anti-Semitism that it is. So
I would add.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Lisa, please continue.
No, go ahead.
Well, first of all, thank you to Alums for Campus Fairness so much for throwing this outstanding event. I also, not surprisingly, fully agree with everything both Yael and Elisa said. One other challenge I would mention is that a lot of students out there, I could not begin to give you a number, but in my experience, a lot of students out there, Jewish and Zionist students, still do not have any sense that there are legal protections at all that are available to them and that do protect them. They're also not aware at all of their resources. And I think, I don't want to put the burden on anybody, but I think this is why it's so important for groups that have boots on the ground, so to speak, on campus, make sure to convey to their students what's out there, what can help them, and give them some sense of how that help looks. For example, anytime I talk to a student about this or have any conversation about a potential campus situation, I start by telling them that by talking to me, that doesn't mean they're signing up for a lawsuit. That doesn't mean we ever have to speak again once we finish this call. They can hang up on me mid-sentence if they want to. And on top of that, no unilateral action is taken at any point without the student being on board. If they tell me, no, we don't want you to ever communicate with the school, we want you to help perhaps behind the scenes, that's fine. The lawyers here, all of us, are here to and are devoted to helping our clients, not our organizations, not the greater cause. I mean, yes, it's all those do kind of come together. But our main goal and responsibility is to serving our clients. And I think when students understand this, that they can come seek legal help, that they can do so confidentially, that again, if they want it to end after that call, that's fine. And just in general, they have some sense, they don't need to know the legal nitty gritty. We're not trying to turn every student into a lawyer, but they have some sense of what protections are out there and what kind of situations might give rise to a legal violation. That's not to say that every one of these situations does give rise to a lawsuit. As Yael mentioned, it is often very difficult. A lot of the anti-Semitism masquerading as anti-Zionism can complicate the possibility of legal actions. But just for these students to know that there's something there, that they should seek help, if nothing else, then because there are certain statutes of limitations on actions. And if they wait around too long, if they don't engage in best practices regarding preservation of evidence, information gathering, that kind of thing, then when the time comes, they're going to find themselves out of luck, and we don't want that to happen. We want to help them in an effective way whenever we can.
Okay, so thank you.
Lori, may I add just one last thing from what I'm seeing in the chats, because I think some people are raising really important points right now. Ben, Aliza, as always, I agree with you. I love listening to you guys. I love working with you. Everyone should know that we all frequently partner together and work together, and we're all stronger when we do so. I think that from our work with students at Stand With Us, the points that I'm seeing that critical race theory often, not always, but often has an anti-Semitic, definitely anti-Zionist tone to it. That Jewish students on campus are often being labeled as white supremacists, as white privilege, that Jewish students are up against this in a way that we didn't even see necessarily a year ago. This is definitely a huge challenge on campus. It's a legal challenge, and it's something that we are fighting and helping students fight every single day. So I just wanted to recognize that. David, I think, made that comment, and it's true, and it's a big problem. And as for the problems of higher education, yes, higher education is a mess right now. There's so many problems starting from middle school all the way through college in terms of being Jewish and what Jewish kids are facing. This is not legal, so I'm going to stop here. But I just noted this week that in a lot of high schools, people aren't even learning World War II anymore. I'm not talking Holocaust, I'm saying World War II. And if we aren't even learning this anymore, I don't even know where we'll be 10 years from now. So there's a lot of work to be done. And I'm so excited to have all these minds here thinking about it.
Okay, thank you, panelists. So my next question has to do with something that was issued under the Trump administration. And I'm talking about Executive Order 13899. And my question is, what are the practical implications of it for stemming the tide of anti-Semitic activity on the college campus? And whoever takes this question, if you could just briefly explain what the order was and where it stands now and how it might be effective.
Sure, Lori, I'll start there. So in order to understand President Trump's executive order on combating anti-Semitism, you need to understand a little bit of the history of Title VI and how Title VI of the Civil Rights Act has been applied. So Title VI of the Civil Rights Act is a law that basically says that any entity that receives government funding may not discriminate on the basis of race, color, or national origin. What's interesting is that Title VI does not include religion as a protected category. That was actually deliberate at the time that it was enacted. Part of the reason for that is because religious institutions wanted to be able to be sure to continue to hire, sometimes make faith-based decisions that way, and didn't want that to be considered discrimination. The problem is that years later, that led to certain difficulties, particularly after 9/11, when there were members of faith-based groups that were suffering discrimination on campuses, because almost every university in the United States, public and private, receives some kind of government funding. So Title VI of the Civil Rights Act applies to them all. There's a very, very small number of universities that are funded exclusively through private donations. So Title VI applies to them all. And basically what it means is that the government can't give money to a university that's not protecting its students, that's engaging in unlawful discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin. So after 9/11, Muslims were being discriminated against, and Sikhs who were being mistaken for Muslims were suffering from tremendous discrimination. So the question came before the Office of Civil Rights, because if a university is violating Title VI, then individuals who feel that their rights, that they've been discriminated against, have a choice. They can either go to court and bring a case in court, or they could go the administrative route, which is to file a complaint with the Department of Education, which was called the Office of Civil Rights, or OCR, in the Department of Education. And the Department of Education would then review these complaints, and they wield a very significant hammer, because if the Department of Education finds that a university is engaging in unlawful discrimination, they can cut off all of that university's funding. The universities clearly don't want that. So what ends up happening is that they engage in negotiation with the Department of Education and come to an agreement as to what steps they need to take to address that harassment and discrimination to satisfy the Department of Education so that they can continue to receive the government funds. So the question came up when these religious groups after 9/11 were complaining that they were suffering from harassment and discrimination: does the Department of Education even have jurisdiction to review those complaints? Because these are religious groups, and Title VI doesn't include religion. Ken Marcus, who is the founder of the Brandeis Center and is also now our chairman, he actually was serving in 2004 his first stint as head of the Office of Civil Rights when this question came up. And he concluded, of course, members of faith-based groups receive the protection of Title VI when they're being harassed or discriminated against on the basis of race or national origin or ethnic origin discrimination. And just because they are also members and share a common faith doesn't mean they lose the protections of racial, national, ethnic origin discrimination. So he wrote a Dear Colleague letter at that point in 2004 explaining this. In 2010, that was in the Bush administration. In 2010, during President Obama's administration, the Department of Justice came out with the same understanding of Title VI, and they wrote a Dear Colleague letter that quoted from and followed the same guidelines and said that we agree that although Title VI of the Civil Rights Act does not prohibit discrimination on the basis of religion, discrimination against Jews, Muslims, Sikhs, and members of other religious groups violates Title VI when that discrimination is based on the group's actual or perceived shared ancestry or ethnic characteristics, rather than the member's religious practice. So from 2010, for the past decade, you have had the Department of Justice and the Department of Education that have understood that when members of religious groups are targeted on the basis of their shared ancestry and ethnicity, they are protected by Title VI. So now, what did the executive order do in 2019? What it did was a few things. Number one, it kicked this protection up a notch. So instead of now just being on the level of these Dear Colleagues, or what they would call sub-regulatory guidance and advisory letters, this now brought it up to the level of an executive order, where the president said, this is how we understand Title VI. It applies to all these groups, and particularly to Jews, as well as these other groups, when they're being targeted on the basis of their shared ancestry or ethnicity. It also expanded it, so now it applies to all the agencies in the executive branch that provide funding that would be covered by Title VI. So it's not just the Department of Education and Department of Justice. It's now all the federal agencies. And then, most significantly, what it did is it linked Title VI to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. And it said, if you want to understand what it means, if you want to understand what anti-Semitism, what national origin, ethnic origin discrimination against Jews looks like, look to the IRA definition. Look to the IRA definition to understand whenever you are confronted with an allegation of anti-Semitic harassment against Jews on the basis of their shared ancestry or ethnicity. That's what this did. And you can see the significance of it because the first opinion, the first resolution agreement that was reached after the executive order was passed required, and this was with NYU, required NYU to incorporate the IRA definition into the university's own anti-discrimination policies. So what it is doing is compelling the universities to now recognize the anti-Semitism as described in the IRA definition as anti-Semitism and as unlawful harassment and discrimination of Jews.
Elisa, what is the status of this executive order now?
It is still in effect, like executive orders that past presidents have adopted and have issued. It was not rescinded. There were several executive orders that President Biden rescinded early on in his presidency. He did not rescind this one. It is, I know people had made comments because it's no longer on the current White House website, but it is still on the archived Trump website, the same way all executive orders from prior administrations are on the websites, the archived websites of those administrations. So it's still in effect. And the question now will just be how forcefully the Department of Education decides to follow it. But it is, you know, in terms of universities, it is still the standard that applies.
Do any of the other panelists want to add to what Elisa said? No? Okay, next question. What legal resources are available to students who are victims of anti-Semitism on campus? Who wants to take that? Ben? Okay. You have to unmute.
Sorry, I was getting a message saying the host was not allowing anybody to unmute, but here we are. Thank you for the question. Well, you're looking at some of the resources right here. I would say some of the, if not the main resources for students. That's what our organizations do. I would say at least 50%, if not more, of our work at the Lawfare Project involves Campus Matters. And I sort of alluded to this in my response to the first question, but when I talk about addressing these issues, this can range all the way from advising students completely behind the scenes about, you know, what, say someone calls with an issue that doesn't quite reach what we think would be the legal threshold at this point, advising them what to do, how to hopefully work with the administration, what offices to go to, what procedures and materials they need to be familiar with. We will sit there and walk them through this stuff if they need, and we're happy to do so because certainly codes of conduct and other university materials are not necessarily written in the most straightforward or user-friendly manner. And listen, understandably, students often don't have the patience to go through pages and pages hoping they find what it is that's relevant to their situation. So all the way from helping them really understand their school's policies, what office should they go to if and when they need to file a bias complaint? Is a bias complaint the appropriate step? How do we draft that complaint? Any number of these things we help students with. If they do want, and we think it's appropriate for us to be liaising directly with the university on their behalf, we will do that. I know this is my colleagues as well. We offer endless, certainly endless now in the time of Zoom, endless training sessions for students, again, with this specific goal of giving as many of them as possible, even a taste of what's available to them and what their rights are. And then at the Lawfare Project, if it does become time or it gets to the point, for example, as it did in our lawsuit with against San Francisco State, a few years ago, which we are now engaged with again and may have to haul back into court to enforce some provisions of our settlement agreement with them. If it gets to that, students should come to us. Often these matters are quite complex. If we're talking about a lawsuit, the Lawfare Project will go to any of its 500 plus private practice attorneys and recruit whoever we think is best and whoever we can to come in as a partner in litigation. And we go forward. We do whatever it is that we need to help these students. And I would even say some matters that aren't so much legal or even getting to the legal point, but students often want to know, what are potential legal implications of BDS so they can communicate effectively if they are, say, attending a hearing of a student governing body to discuss a BDS resolution that's on the table. What can they say about it? How do they explain that engaging in BDS may and often does violate various state laws, could violate, and that this is tantamount to unlawful discrimination? How do they oppose and rebut the arguments that this is just protected speech and freedom fighting, things like that? If a resolution is a student government resolution or other legislative instrument, if you will, is passed, was it passed properly? If not, is there a way, what are the procedures for challenging it? Really helping with, I would say, giving a holistic approach and helping in any manner, in any situation where these students need it. There are a lot of issues that come out of student government. In my experience, most of those do not or have not given rise to legal action. And I would say, again, in my opinion, in and of themselves, do not tend to pave the way for Title VI complaints. They could certainly be a component of that, but alone, that generally I have seen is not enough to constitute the type of hostile environment that would implicate Title VI. But what else do we do about it? How do we garner support from other students? How do we get them all in the same, delivering the same message and ensuring that that message is correct, that we are making the right points and we are addressing, again, rebutting the endless misinformation and wrong points that the other side is presenting. Yeah, I could give a number of other case examples, but I don't want to monopolize all the time. I will turn it over to whoever else would like to continue.
Just one quick question before you do that. When a student is facing this situation, how does he know to reach out to you?
Well, we work very well. Part of it is we advertise. We put ourselves out there on Facebook and the Jewish press in particular, wherever we can. But we're still a small entity, so we rely a lot on our partner organizations. I'll give a shout out to one. Israel on Campus Coalition does an amazing job in everything they do with Campus Matters. We'll go to them if something comes up, but they'll come to us. All these groups that actually have, as I said earlier, boots on the ground on campus, they're the ones who need to be telling us, because these students, assuming they even know that we exist, they may not quite understand when is it time, is it appropriate? People are intimidated by lawyers. I don't think the three of us are particularly intimidating, except when we decide we want to be. But students don't know that. College students have probably not dealt with lawyers much, if at all, in their lives, and just don't know at all what they're getting into. So again, I don't mean to keep harping on this point, but as I said earlier, it's so important that the groups and individuals who work with the students make sure they know what resources are available to them, because I don't want to rely on students just Googling and hoping they find the right place.
Right. Do any of our other panelists want to weigh in?
I'll weigh in just on that last point. Ben, I agree with everything you said. You're exactly right, and that students need to be informed and don't necessarily always know. At Stand With Us, we're a campus organization. We have hundreds of high school interns and college interns. So every year at our annual conferences, what we do a lot of our time is tell them, if a legal issue comes up, turn to our legal department, turn to your campus coordinator, turn to whoever you trust and get legal help. Don't try to go at this alone. I think about the Max Price case recently that Eliza handled, and Max Price was being threatened with being thrown out of his role in the Student Senate for standing up for Israel. And I shiver to think what would have happened to him if he hadn't gone and gotten that legal representation. It's critical that students reach out for help and know that there's multiple resources out there. There's Stand With Us, there's Lawfare, there's Brandeis Center. There's many different resources out there for them, and we all want to help them, and that's what we're here to do. I want to also just quickly say that I've seen in the chat some really excellent questions. I know we'll get to them. I just want to make sure that as part of what we're saying right now, if a student has a question about holiday observance, for instance, this year, the start of the school year is probably going to be overlapping with Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is the day after Labor Day. And so a lot of students who do observe Rosh Hashanah will be probably missing out on orientation, on their first meetings with teachers, on lots of very important experiences. And so we've already at Stand With Us notified every university in America to be aware of this and to help students get the religious accommodation they need. We're also working with Hillel. But if any student feels that they're worried about this issue, please reach out to any of us, Ben, Eliza, me, we will all help you. Another question that I saw is, how do you report an incident? How do you report a bias incident? Stand With Us has an intake form on our website. I'm sure Ben and Eliza also have intake forms. Just come to one of us and we will help you. We really could hope it couldn't be easier for you to reach out and get help if you need help.
Okay,
And
we're
if I
running
can-
a little short of time, so.
I want to make sure that people do know of one important resource, because the Brandeis Center has a program for law school students where what we do is we call them our Jigsaw Fellows, our Justice Initiative guiding student activists worldwide. We've developed a curriculum where we teach the law students the areas of law they need to understand in order to be able to assist the undergraduates who are confronting and who are really on the front lines when it comes to combating the anti-Semitism on campus. And we've done this specifically because, as Ben noted, students often are too intimidated to come to lawyers. And the truth is, it's really important for students to seek the legal guidance as early as possible, because sometimes it's better for them to be contacting a lawyer who will tell them that you should be notifying the university informally about what's happening and not filing a formal bias complaint. Because sometimes what happens is if you use the formal bias complaints on the system, all that does is it enables the university to protect themselves because they claim to have investigated, then they do nothing satisfactory. And what happens is it removes the jurisdiction from the Office of Civil Rights from reviewing an issue that the university already claims to have dealt with and investigated. So our program, our Jigsaw program, we make Jigsaw students available to undergraduates. And what we've done is we've let all the different organizations that are working on the campuses, so, Hasbara Fellowships, CAMRA, obviously Stand With Us, the Lawfare Project there, but ICC. And what's happening and what we see happening, the IAC, is that now these groups, when they have students who they work with who face anti-Semitism on campus, they recommend to the students to come and to seek that legal strategic guidance before they file complaints, before they go for meetings with administrators. We can help with the talking points, all the things that Ben was saying. But we can also pair you up with a law student who will work with the undergraduates. So I would suggest, if there are people here, first of all, if they know law students who are interested in becoming Jigsaw Fellows, we're always looking for those. And if there are undergraduates who need it, they can reach the Brandeis Center at info@brandeiscenter.com and we can pair them up.
Thank you. Thank you. So just to go back to the organization of alums, how can alumni help the students? Any thoughts on that from our panelists?
I'll say, first of all, just show your support. I frankly don't know what that looks like because I'm not in the advocacy world, so to speak, so much as in the legal world. And I won't claim to be an expert in anything that I am not in, but show them that you're there for them. So many of these students I find, maybe less so those who are, say, fellows with various Zionist organizations, various Jewish organizations, and have that community, but a lot feel like they're going at this alone. And I think knowing that there is a base out there, that their community is helping them in any way, even if it's just saying, we care about what you're dealing with, we would like to help you, you tell us what you need, but knowing you're there and having that support can be very meaningful. Certainly, whatever influence alumni can exercise to, for example, ensure that administrators and relevant campus faculty and staff are educated on issues such as Title VI, its mere existence, the IRA definition, the fact, what it means, the fact that the Department of Education is mandated to consider it in evaluating alleged discrimination. I had a situation recently where a student at a New York college who is very, very involved in Jewish student life, works with a lot of different organizations, and is also quite well versed in all these matters that we've talked about, went to the relevant office to file a discrimination complaint. And the person who was helping, who was not some executive assistant, but an official in the office, kind of looked at her like she was crazy when she mentioned Title VI, had no idea what the IRA definition was, even when she started explaining it. The fact that faculty or staff, and that administrators whose job it is to ensure that the law is upheld and that discrimination does not happen and is dealt with properly in accordance with the law, that school policies are implemented in accordance with the law. The fact that they don't even know about some of these things is outrageous understatement. So whatever influence all of you have as alumni to really push these people and say, and make sure they understand why this is important. Why do they need to know about this? They are setting themselves up to have a better campus climate and be more inclusive and welcoming to Jewish students. Surely they should want that. If they don't want that, that's a whole other issue. And then then maybe you figure out how to call them out on that. But whatever influence you have, use it.
Thank you, Ben.
I would just add very quickly that if you have, if you're in a position to get your university to adopt the IRA definition, there's really no more important work that could be done. We really need that on every possible campus where we can make that happen. If you're a lawyer and you want to volunteer your time as a pro bono attorney, Stand With Us has a pro bono attorney network. I won't speak on behalf of the other organizations, but volunteer your time as an attorney, volunteer your time obviously as an alum. And the last thing I would say is that never underestimate, as Ben said, the pressure of alumni dollars and alumni voices. Look what happened at Oberlin. I'm losing sleep right now over what's happening right now at Pomona College. If you are in Pomona College or your kids are at Pomona, that is the campus to be watching right now. If there's time, I'm happy to fill you in on what's going on there. But I actually think that legal work is incredibly important, but it's the alumni who actually have the biggest influence right now.
Thank you, panelists. I think we have just a few minutes for some questions that arose.
Yeah, Laura, we have time for probably one question just to
Okay.
keep with the conversation and keep the conference moving. I know there's been a lot of conversation in the chats, which is excellent. And Yael, Ben, Lisa, even Laurie, if you want to, feel free to answer them in the chat also, so that the conversation can continue even virtually as we continue. But we can open it for one more. I know that someone wanted to ask a question. I think it was John Weiss who wanted to ask in person with his video, and I want to welcome him to do so.
Oh, thank you so much, Avi. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great. So first of all, I have family in Israel. I support Israel, but I'm not religious. I support Israel because of human rights. I support Israel because displacement. And I feel like much or all of what I'm hearing from organizations like this is an emphasis on Jews rather than emphasis on human rights. For example, the San Francisco Zionists recently published a post that said, France has abandoned the Jewish community. And that was really disappointing to me. I think that France has abandoned human rights, justice, and science. And I'd like to know, I'd like to hear some responses about perhaps making this not just about Jews, but about more universal issues. Thanks.
Any panelists want to weigh in?
You're absolutely right that it's a human rights issue. And I think that, you know, what we see happening today is that when society is saying we have to welcome everyone to the table with their complete identity, the one group that is being told no, you first have to either hide or shed this part of who you are in order to be accepted, are the Jews. The one group that's being told, we deny you the right to describe what you view as hostility and harassment and discrimination of you and your identity, are the Jews. And you're absolutely right that that is a violation of human rights. The denial of the Jews' history, the denial of our lived experience and our connection, our indigeneity to the land of Israel, that's also there's now a term, erasive anti-Semitism, right, that people have started to use, which is true. Denying the Jews and trying to erase our experience and our history is a form of anti-Semitism, but it's also, I think you're absolutely right, a human rights violation and should be understood that way.
I agree completely. I'll keep this brief, but I don't know that I would certainly highlight the human rights aspect, the civil rights aspect, the legal aspects of this. Again, as I mentioned earlier, under various state laws, actually engaging in BDS, refusing to do business with somebody because they are Israeli, because they are Jewish, that's illegal and you can sue somebody. We have done that. So I think highlighting that, saying this is not about advocacy, this is not, you want to compare it to South Africa, whatever you want to do, even though that's ludicrous, we can't stop people from speaking. But if you carry this out, what you are advocating for is unlawful discrimination, violates civil rights, and there you go. But I don't know that I necessarily think it's a good idea to remove Judaism from the conversation. I think if we look at other minority groups and their movements, and most recently the Stop Asian Hate. Hope I'm not messing that up, but you know what I'm talking about. Various other movements, Black Lives Matter, they acknowledge very loudly and clearly that what they are combating is hatred, discrimination, unlawful treatment of members of their group based on their protected class, their race, their ethnicity, their religion, their national origin. And partly, if you remove that protected class from the conversation, I think it may muddle the legal argument a bit. But we all know that the anti-Semitism out there, I mean, there is hatred towards Jews. It is, unfortunately, I would say, quite systemic in higher education. It is all around us. You can pick up the paper and see various incidents of anti-Semitism all over the country. I was in Michigan visiting family for the weekend. The ADL just released a piece that I think anti-Semitic incidents had gone up 21%, if I believe that's the right number, over the past year. So we know it's out there, and I don't think there's any reason we need to deny or even just sort of gloss over the fact that the motivation behind these unlawful, disgusting, unacceptable acts is hatred of Jews. We need to address it, we need to call it out, and we need to elevate it to the same level where it is unacceptable, just like hatred and prejudice against other groups is seen as unacceptable in polite society.
Okay, I think we ran out of time, but I want to thank our wonderful panelists for all of your insights, and all the panelists have invited questions through the chat, and we'll respond and can contact them even apart from this. So thank you all.
Thank you for inviting me.